The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living metal. And within its walls, the representatives of 12 ancient species had gathered to decide the fate of a world they had never visited. High Arbiter Veltho Khan of the Centauri Dominion rose slowly from his hovering throne. His forearms spread wide in a gesture that demanded silence from every corner of the massive room. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of galactic dominance. "My fellow council members," he began, his deep voice echoing through translation devices worn by every delegate. "We have watched them for 300 cycles, and what we have seen should terrify us all." A holographic projection flickered to life at the center of the chamber, displaying a small blue and green world spinning slowly in the darkness of space. And around it, the delegates could see the primitive satellites and space stations that orbited like tiny insects around a fruit Earth. They called it, and the creatures who lived upon it called themselves humans. Ambassador Crixon of the Velthari leaned forward on his 6 legs, his mandibles clicking with barely contained disgust as he studied the images that flowed across the projection. And his compound eyes reflected the light of human cities that burned bright against the darkness of their night side. "Look at them," he hissed through his translator. "They breed without control and spread without purpose. And they have already infected every corner of their own world." The projection shifted to show human colonies on their moon, mining operations on asteroids, and the beginnings of cities rising from the red dust of Mars. And the council members watched with growing unease as the timeline advanced to show just how quickly these creatures had expanded. Minister Yielden of the Crystalline Collective tapped one of her glass-like fingers against the armrest of her chair and spoke in a voice that rang like chimes. "In a storm, 300 years ago they could barely reach their own orbit," she observed. "And now they speak of traveling to other stars within their lifetimes." The room fell silent as this truth settled over them like a heavy blanket. And every delegate understood what this meant for the careful balance of power they had maintained for millennia. High Arbiter Valthokan gestured, and the projection changed again, this time showing recordings that their observation drones had captured over the centuries. And the images that played before them told a story that no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. They watched humans survive a plague that killed half their population, only to rebuild their civilization within a few generations. And they watched humans endure ice ages that should have driven them to extinction. And they watched humans crawl out of the wreckage of wars that consumed entire nations. "They do not die," Velthokan said quietly, and his voice carried a tremor that few had ever heard from the proud Centauri leader. "We have watched them face extinction a dozen times, and each time they refused to accept their fate." Ambassador Crixon slammed one of his appendages against his console with enough force to crack the screen, and his voice rose to a shriek that the translators struggled to convert. "Then we must finish what nature could not," he declared. "We must burn them from the galaxy before they become a threat we cannot contain." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats at this suggestion, but none spoke against it. And the silence that followed was an agreement more powerful than any words. The youngest delegate in the chamber was Observer Thelix of the Wandering Kind, a species known for their caution and their long memories. And she raised one slender hand to request permission to speak. "Perhaps we should attempt communication first," she suggested in a voice barely above a whisper. "They have shown no aggression toward the stars, and they do not even know we exist." High Arbiter Velthokan turned his cold gaze upon her and smiled with teeth that had evolved to tear flesh from bone. "And what would we say to them, young one?" he asked with barely hidden contempt. "Would we welcome them to a galaxy that has no room for another predator species?" He gestured to the projection once more, and it displayed detailed analyses of human behavior. Their wars and their weapons and their endless hunger for more territory and more resources. They fight among themselves constantly, he continued. They create weapons capable of destroying their own world. And they show no signs of the peaceful nature we require from species who wish to join our council. Minister Yielden nodded slowly, her crystalline form catching the light and scattering it across the chamber in patterns that reflected her troubled thoughts. The calculations are clear, she admitted. If we allow them to develop faster than light travel on their own, they will reach our borders within 200 cycles. And by then they will have weapons we cannot predict and numbers we cannot match. The vote was called without further debate. And one by one, the 12 species of the Galactic Council cast their decisions into the central registry. 12 votes for war, 0 votes against. And with this simple act, the fate of humanity was sealed, or so they believed. High Arbiter Veltho Khan issued the orders that very cycle. And within days the greatest armada the galaxy had ever assembled began to gather at the edge of human space. 10,000 warships carrying crews from every council species formed into battle groups that stretched across millions of kilometers. And their commanders reviewed their simple mission with confidence that bordered on boredom. They would jump into the human solar system, destroy any resistance they encountered, and then systematically eliminate every human colony until the species was nothing more than a memory. The humans had no faster-than-light travel, no plasma weapons, no shields, and no knowledge that aliens even existed. And the Council Admirals estimated the campaign would take less than a single cycle to complete, as the Armada prepared to jump. Admiral Kreth, Volume of the Centauri flagship, made a final entry in his command log. Today, we remove a threat before it can become a danger, he recorded. Future generations will thank us for our wisdom and our courage in making this difficult decision. He could not have known how wrong he was. And he could not have imagined that within 3 years, his precious armada would be scattered wreckage floating in the void between stars. The jump drives activated across 10,000 ships. Reality twisted and folded around them. And the greatest military force in galactic history vanished from council space. They expected to find primitives cowering before their power. They expected easy victory and quick glory. They did not expect that humanity had been waiting for them. And they certainly did not expect what humanity had been hiding beneath their mask of peaceful exploration. The war to end humanity was about to begin. But it would not end the way the Council had planned. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the United Earthship, Defiance, and watched the emergency alerts flood across every screen in the command center. And her hands gripped the railing so hard that her knuckles turned white. The sky above Earth had torn open like a wound, and from that wound poured warships beyond counting, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, each one carrying weapons that could crack continents with a single shot. "Report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the cold terror spreading through her chest. Commander Chun turned from his station with a face that had gone pale as fresh snow, and his words came out in a rush that he could barely control. Over 8,000 confirmed contacts and more arriving every second, he reported. They have taken position beyond lunar orbit, and they are broadcasting on all frequencies. The main screen flickered and displayed the message that was being sent to every device on Earth, to every radio and television and computer screen. And the words were simple enough that no translation was needed. "SU reindeer. Unconditionally within 48 hours, or your world will be." Helena closed her eyes for just a moment and allowed herself to feel the weight of what was happening. The sheer impossibility of alien invasion becoming terrifying reality in the span of a single hour. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer just an admiral defending a fleet. She was the last hope of her entire species. How many did we lose in the first strike? she asked quietly. Commander Chun swallowed hard before answering, and his voice cracked on the words, 6 orbital stations destroyed before we even knew they were there, he said. Preliminary estimates suggest 6 million casualties, mostly civilians. 6 million people dead in the opening seconds of a war they never saw coming. And Helena knew that number would grow beyond imagination if she did not act quickly. She turned to the communications officer and spoke, with a calm that she did not feel. Open a secure channel to Director Morrison at Antarctic Station 7, she ordered. Use the quantum encryption protocol and tell him that the nightmare scenario is now reality. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances at this order, for none of them had ever heard of Antarctic Station 7 or Director Morrison. But they obeyed without question because Admiral Vasquez had earned their absolute trust. Channel connected within seconds, and a face appeared on her private screen. An old man with white hair and eyes that held secrets older than most nations. I saw the arrival, Director Morrison said without greeting. I assume you are calling to activate the protocol. Helena nodded once. A sharp movement that carried the weight of 60 years of preparation. Operation Prometheus is now active, she confirmed. Wake them all up. Director Morrison smiled, but there was no joy in his expression. Only the grim satisfaction of a man who had prepared for disaster his entire life. Understood, Admiral, he replied. The children of Titan are ready to meet their parents. The channel closed, and Helena turned to face her bewildered crew, knowing that she owed them an explanation before she sent them into a battle that would change everything they believed about their place in the universe. What I am about to tell you is classified above any level you have ever encountered, she began, and her voice carried across the silent bridge like a prayer. 60 years ago, a research team in Antarctica discovered something buried beneath 3 kilometers of ice. She paused to let this sink in before continuing. It was a ship, she said. Alien in origin, dead for over 1 million years, but preserved perfectly by the cold. And inside that ship, we found technology that should not exist. Commander Chun stepped forward with questions burning in his eyes. But Helena raised a hand to stop him. We reverse-engineered everything, she explained. Faster than light drives, energy shields, plasma weapons. Materials stronger than anything we could create on our own. And we built a secret fleet using these technologies. The bridge crew stared at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to hope. And she understood their confusion perfectly. We hid our true capabilities because we knew this day would come. She continued. The universe is vast and we are young, and we knew that somewhere out there were species who would see us as a threat to be eliminated. She gestured to the tactical display showing the enemy armada, positioned around their solar system like a noose waiting to tighten. They think we are primitives playing with rockets and nuclear weapons, she said, with a smile that showed teeth. They have no idea what we have been building in the shadows, across the solar system. The truth of her words was already becoming apparent in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Sections of rock that had seemed solid for centuries began to split apart, revealing shipyards that had been operating in secret for decades. And from those shipyards emerged warships that gleamed with technology the Council had never imagined around Saturn's rings. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining stations dropped their camouflage and powered up weapons capable of destroying small moons. Mars, on Europa, on Titan. Hidden bases activated, and soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war they prayed would never come, suited up in power armor that made them equal to a dozen regular troops. Helena watched the reports flow in as humanity's true military might revealed itself. And she felt something that surprised her. After so much fear, she felt hope. Admiral, the communications officer called out with excitement rising in her voice. We are receiving confirmation signals from over 300 hidden installations. And fleet strength is currently at 4,200 combat-ready vessels. It was not enough to match the enemy in raw numbers. But Helena knew that numbers were not everything in war. She opened a channel to every human ship, every hidden base, every soldier waiting for orders. And she spoke words that would echo through history. This is Admiral Helena Vasquez, assuming command of all Earth Defense Forces, she announced. The enemy believes they have come to slaughter sheep, but they will soon discover that they have walked into a den of wolves. She paused and looked around at her crew, at the brave men and women who would fight and die beside her in the hours to come. We did not start this war, she continued, but we will finish it, and when we are done, the galaxy will know that humanity is not a species to be threatened or destroyed. She closed the channel and turned to the helm officer with fire burning in her eyes. Set course for the enemy fleet, she commanded, and let us show these aliens what happens when you corner humanity with no way out. The Defiance surged forward, and behind it came a fleet that the universe had never expected to exist. And in the command ships of the Council Armada, the first tremors of doubt began to spread as sensors detected what should have been impossible. The primitives were coming, and they were coming with teeth bared and weapons ready. The Battle of Luna lasted 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes, the Galactic Council learned a lesson that would haunt their species for generations to come. Admiral Crethvalum of the Centauri Dominion had ordered his vanguard fleet of 800 warships to advance on Earth's moon, expecting to brush aside whatever primitive resistance the humans could muster. And his confidence had been so complete that he was already planning his victory celebration. Then the human fleet arrived, and everything changed. The first sign of trouble came when his sensors detected energy signatures that should not have existed. Shields that matched Council technology, weapons that burned with the fury of captured stars, and ships that moved through space like predators closing on wounded prey. How is this possible? Crethvalum demanded as the tactical display filled with warnings and alerts. They were supposed to be primitives. His first officer had no answer. And within seconds, there was no time for answers because the human ships had opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through Dominion shields like paper, and missiles that moved faster than anything the Council had ever faced slammed into hulls designed to withstand asteroid impacts. And the vanguard fleet that had advanced with such arrogance began to die in flashes of light and expanding clouds of debris. But it was not the weapons that truly terrified the Council crews. It was the way the humans fought. Council fleets had always maintained careful formations, trading volleys at range, maneuvering for advantage with patience and precision. Because this was how civilized species waged war. The humans did not fight like civilized species. They swarmed. Human ships accelerated at rates that should have crushed their crews into paste, executing turns and spins that Council computers calculated as suicidal. And they pressed their attacks with a fury that bordered on madness. A Dominion cruiser managed to cripple a human destroyer with a lucky shot, and the watching Council officers expected the smaller ship to retreat or surrender as any sensible vessel would. Instead, the dying destroyer increased its speed and rammed directly into the cruiser's bridge, destroying both ships in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Admiral Crethvalum watched this with horror dawning in his 4 eyes, and he understood in that moment that they had made a terrible mistake. They do not value their own lives, he whispered to himself. But his words were captured by the bridge recorders and would be studied by Council strategists for years to come. The battle continued, and the human tactics became even more aggressive as the fighting intensified. When shields failed and ships lost power, human crews did not wait for death or surrender. They suited up in armored spacesuits, launched themselves into the vacuum, and attempted to board enemy vessels through damaged hull sections. Council soldiers had never faced enemies who would swim through hard vacuum with nothing but a rifle and a knife. And they did not know how to fight such madness on the Dominion flagship. A human boarding party cut through the airlock with plasma torches and fought their way toward the bridge. And the security footage from that assault would become required viewing at every Council military academy. The humans fought like demons, advancing through hails of weapons fire that would have stopped any Council species, ignoring wounds that should have been fatal, and protecting each other with a ferocity that defied explanation. One human soldier took a shot to the chest that should have killed him instantly, but he lived long enough to tackle the shooter and break his neck before collapsing. And his squad mates did not mourn or retreat, but instead fought harder to avenge their fallen brother within 11 minutes. The Vanguard fleet had been reduced to scattered wreckage and drifting escape pods, and Admiral Crethvalum found himself giving the order he had never imagined he would speak. All ships retreat, he commanded through numb lips. Fall back to the main fleet and regroup. The survivors jumped away, leaving behind the bodies of thousands of Council soldiers and the burning remains of ships that had been invincible only hours before back on the Council homeworlds. High Arbiter Veltho Khan reviewed the combat data with growing terror, and he summoned emergency sessions to discuss what they had learned about their supposed prey. Their bodies are remarkably resilient, reported a Velthari scientist who had analyzed medical data from captured human corpses. They can survive injuries that would kill any Council species, and they heal at rates we have never observed before. A military strategist from the Crystalline Collective added her own observations with a voice that trembled like a cracked bell. Their tactics are unlike anything in our records, she explained. They adapt in real time, changing strategies mid-battle as if their commanders can read our intentions. But it was the psychological analysis that truly horrified the Council humans bonded with everything. They learned their fellow soldiers, their ships, their weapons, and even abstract concepts like honor and duty. And these bonds gave them strength that no species had ever matched. They fight for each other, Ambassador Crixon said slowly, struggling to understand this alien concept. Not for territory or resources or power, but for the humans beside them. He pulled up footage of human medics operating on wounded soldiers while under fire, ignoring the danger to themselves in order to save their comrades. And he shook his head in disbelief. We thought their internal wars made them weak, he admitted. We thought fighting each other for millennia would leave them exhausted and broken. He looked around the chamber at his fellow Council members, at the leaders of civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Instead, it made them the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. High Arbiter Velthokan rose from his throne with movements that no longer carried their usual arrogance. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet and uncertain. "What do we do now?" he asked. And for the first time in his long career, he truly did not know the answer. The war they had started so confidently was becoming a nightmare, and in the depths of space, Admiral Helena Vasquez was already planning her next offensive. She had read the ancient texts found in the Antarctic ship, the warnings left by the species that had buried themselves in Earth's ice 1,000,000 years ago. And she knew something the Council did not. Humanity had been seeded on Earth by ancient aliens who wanted to create the perfect warriors. And now those warriors had finally grown into their inheritance. The Council had not attacked a primitive species. They had awakened sleeping gods of war, and there would be no going back to the way things were before. The war lasted 3 years, and each day brought new horrors for the Galactic Council as they discovered just how badly they had underestimated the species. They sought to destroy what they had planned, as a quick extermination became a grinding nightmare that consumed fleets and shattered empires. And every victory they claimed came at a cost that made it taste like defeat. Admiral Helena Vasquez, now Supreme Commander of all United Earth Forces, led the human counterattack with a ruthlessness that the Council had never faced. And her strategies broke every rule of civilized warfare that the galaxy had developed over millennia. Did not fight for territory or resources. She fought to break her enemy's will to continue. And she understood something that the Council never had. War was not about killing soldiers. It was about destroying hope. Human fleets appeared from nowhere to strike supply convoys carrying food and fuel to distant battlefronts, leaving Council armies stranded and starving on worlds they had conquered. And by the time reinforcements arrived, those armies were dead, and the humans had vanished like ghost mining colonies that produced the rare materials needed for faster-than-light drives exploded without warning, sabotaged by human special forces who had infiltrated years before anyone knew the war would come. And Council ships began running out of fuel in the depths of space communication. Relays were hacked and turned against their creators, broadcasting false orders that sent fleets into ambush, playing recordings of human psychological warfare that kept crews awake for days with fear, and spreading rumors that grew more terrifying with each retelling. They are everywhere, a Centauri captain reported in his final transmission before his ship disappeared. They know what we plan before we plan it, and they strike before we can react. But the most devastating weapon in humanity's arsenal was one the Council had never considered. The humans found allies among the Council's own subjects. For 10,000 years, the 12 ruling species had maintained their power by keeping lesser species as servants and slaves, denying them technology and representation, while extracting their labor and resources. Now, those lesser species saw a chance for freedom, and they took it with both hands. Human agents made contact with rebel groups on dozens of worlds, offering weapons and training. And something far more valuable than either, they offered respect. Join us, the human envoys would say to species that had been treated as animals for generations, not as servants but as equals, and together we will tear down the empire that has enslaved us all. The rebellion spread like fire through dry grass, and soon the Council found itself fighting on two fronts, against human fleets in space and against their own subjects on the ground. High Arbiter Volthokan watched his empire crumble and could not understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. We had 10,000 warships, he raged at his advisors in a meeting that would become infamous in Council history. We had 12 species united against a single enemy. And now we are losing. Ambassador Crixon had the courage to answer honestly, though he knew it might cost him his position. We are losing because we thought like rulers fighting a rebellion, he explained. But the humans think like predators hunting prey. He pulled up a tactical display showing human fleet movements over the past 6 months. And the pattern that emerged made every Council leader in the room go pale. They are not trying to hold territory, Crixon continued. They are hurting us, driving our fleets toward positions where they can be destroyed. And we have been following their plan without even realizing it. The Volturi ambassador pointed to 3 major engagements that the Council had celebrated as victories. Battles where human forces had retreated after inflicting heavy losses. These were not defeats for them, he said. These were distractions, and while we were celebrating, human ships were destroying the shipyards that produce our replacement vessels. The truth hit the Council like a physical blow. And for the first time they understood the full scope of the disaster they had created. They were not fighting a war anymore. They were being hunted to extinction by a species that had mastered the art of hunting over millions of years, one by one. Council species began to seek separate peace with humanity. The wandering kind were first, their representative arriving at a human command post with tears streaming down her face and a simple message. We voted against the war, Observer Felix said to Admiral Vasquez. and we have suffered for our opposition ever since. Please accept our surrender and know that we never wanted this." Helena looked at the young alien who had tried to speak for peace in the council chamber years ago, and she saw sincerity in the creature's strange eyes. "The wandering kind will not be punished for the crimes of others," Helena replied. "Join us as allies and help us end this madness." The Valkyrie surrendered next, offering detailed intelligence about their former partners in exchange for favorable treatment. And then the crystalline collective, and then species after species, until only the Centauri Dominion remained High Arbiter Velthokan refused to surrender even as human marines stormed the streets of his capital city, even as his palace guards fell before soldiers who fought with the fury of a species that had nearly been exterminated when they finally reached his throne room. He was waiting for them with dignity that seemed almost impressive, given how completely he had been defeated. A young human officer approached him, a woman whose face bore scars from battles that would have killed most council species, and she accepted his formal surrender with cold professionalism. "Why?" Velthokan asked as they bound his hands. "Unable to understand even now. You are primitives. You should have been easy to destroy." The scarred officer smiled without warmth and leaned close enough that he could see the fire burning in her eyes. "You studied us from orbit," she said. "You saw our wars and our plagues and our disasters, and you thought that made us weak." She straightened up and looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "You never understood that surviving all of that made us strong," she continued. "That every crisis we overcame taught us how to survive the next one. That every war we fought taught us how to fight the next one." She gestured to the soldiers around her, to the human warriors who had conquered an empire in 3 years. "You created the perfect storm by trying to destroy us," she concluded. "And now you will face the consequences of your arrogance." They led him away in chains, the last leader of the last species to resist humanity's advance. And behind him his empire lay in ruins. The war was over. The real work was about to begin. The Treaty of Geneva was signed on a bright spring morning, on the steps of a United Nations building that had been rebuilt from the ashes of the first alien bombardment. And above the gathered delegates, the sky was filled with warships from a dozen species. But these warships were no longer enemies. They flew under human escort as a sign of the new order that was being born. And their crews watched with a mixture of fear and hope as history unfolded below them. Representatives from every species in the former council stood in neat rows before a podium where Admiral Helena Vasquez waited to speak. And among them stood the leaders of the liberated species, who had risen against their masters during the war. The Centauri Dominion sent a delegation led by a new government that had overthrown the old regime. And High Arbiter Velthokan watched from a prison cell as his successors knelt before the species he had tried to destroy. Ambassador Crixon of the Valkyrie stood with his head bowed, still struggling to understand how his people had fallen so far so quickly. And beside him Observer Thelix of the Wandering Kind held her head high as the only council species that had opposed the war. From the beginning, the galaxy held its breath and waited to learn what humanity would do with its victory. Many expected tyranny, and they had good reason for their fears, because humanity had proven itself capable of terrible things during the war. And they had broken the council so completely that no power remained to oppose them. Some whispered that humanity would become the new rulers of the galaxy, exacting tribute from conquered species and enforcing their will through the fleets that had crushed the greatest military alliance in history. Helena Vasquez stepped to the podium and looked out at the assembly of aliens who had come to learn their fate. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the plaza and through translation devices to every corner of the galaxy. 3 years ago, your council voted to destroy my species, she began. And her words were simple and clear and carried the weight of 6 billion dead. You believed we were primitives who could be swept aside without consequence. And you were wrong." She paused and let the silence stretch, knowing that every being in the galaxy was hanging on her next words. "We fought back," she continued, "and we won. And now we face a choice that will define humanity for generations to come." The alien delegates shifted nervously, waiting for the demands they were certain would follow. The tribute and the territory and the subjugation they believed they deserved. "We could become what we defeated," Helena said. "We could rule through fear and crush any who oppose us. And no power in the galaxy could stop us." She shook her head slowly, and something in her expression changed from the cold warrior who had led humanity through its darkest hours. "But that is not who we are," she declared. "And that is not who we will become." A murmur spread through the assembly as the aliens struggled to understand what they were hearing. And Helena continued before they could recover. "The Galactic Council failed because it was built on fear and domination," she explained. 12 species ruling through force, keeping others as servants and slaves. And when their power was challenged, the entire structure collapsed. She gestured to the sky, to the ships of former enemies flying together above the ceremony. "We will build something different," she announced, "a true federation of equals, where every species has a voice and no one is treated as lesser because they are different." The murmuring grew louder, and Helena raised her hand for silence. "This is not mercy," she clarified. "This is wisdom. Because we have learned through our own history that empires built on oppression always fall. And we have no interest in building something that our children will have to rebuild in 1,000 years." She turned to face the representatives of the liberated species, the beings who had been treated as animals for generations and had risen to claim their freedom. "You will have full membership in the new federation," she told them. "And you will never again be subject to the whims of those who believe themselves superior." Then she turned to the former council species, to the proud civilizations that had ruled for 10,000 years and now stood humbled before their former victims. "You will face justice for your crimes," she said. And her voice hardened. "War criminals will be tried. Reparations will be paid, and the structures of oppression will be dismantled." She paused and softened slightly, offering something that surprised everyone in the assembly. "But you will also have a place in the new order," she continued, "not as rulers, but as partners. And together we will build something that the galaxy has never seen before." The ceremony continued for hours as treaties were signed and agreements were made. And when it finally ended, the galaxy had been transformed in the years that followed. The Federation grew and prospered in ways that would have seemed impossible to the old Council. Human ships patrolled the trade routes, ending piracy and protecting merchant vessels from predators who had preyed on them for centuries. And where the Council had extracted tribute, the Federation offered protection for free. Human scientists shared their technology openly, teaching former enemy species how to build ships and weapons and medical equipment that had once been reserved for the elite. And the knowledge spread like light, driving back darkness. Human diplomats mediated ancient conflicts between species that had been enemies for millennia, finding compromises that served everyone and building bridges where the Council had only built walls. And in the halls of the new Federation, a saying emerged among the alien delegates who worked alongside their human counterparts. They would whisper it to new arrivals, to diplomats and scientists, and soldiers who were just beginning to understand. The species that had conquered the galaxy and then refused to rule it never corner a human, they would say, with voices that mixed respect with lingering fear. They do not know how to surrender. They only know how to win. But there was another saying that emerged in the years that followed, one that carried hope instead of fear. Trust a human with your children, the liberated species would tell each other, because they will protect the innocent with the same fury they bring to battle. Helena Vasquez retired from military service. 5 years after the treaty was signed, passing command to a new generation of leaders who had grown up in a galaxy at peace. She spent her final years teaching at a university that welcomed students from every species, sharing the lessons of history with young beings who had never known war. When she died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, representatives from every species in the Federation attended her funeral. They came to honor the warrior who had saved humanity, but also to honor the leader who had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. And above the ceremony, ships from 100 worlds flew in formation, their crews united in grief for a woman who had changed the galaxy. The war that should have ended humanity had instead forged them into protectors of the very species that tried to destroy them. The Council had triggered their own annihilation by attacking humans. But from those ashes something better had risen, something that would last.